In 1947, a widowed mother named Laura Meredith lost her daughter Susie at a crowded Coney Island beach. She becomes very distressed and starts looking for her daughter everywhere. She bumps into a handsome photographer named Steve, who advises her to go to the police for help. Meanwhile, a black single mother named Annie Johnson has taken Susie under her care. She has reported the incident to the police and is feeding Susie and her daughter, Sarah Jane. Laura soon arrives with a police officer and is grateful when she finds her daughter with Annie. They both begin a conversation as the daughter starts playing at the beach. Both girls start having fun and prank an older man when Steve takes a photograph and promises to deliver it to Susie's address. Laura assumes that Annie is the caretaker of Sarah Jane, as Sarah is white while Annie is black. Annie informs Laura that Sarah Jane's father was white, and he left her before the birth of his daughter. Laura mentions her wish to have a live-in maid someday to care for her daughter Susie. Annie is homeless and looking for a job, so she begs Laura to hire her. However, Laura does not have enough money and can't afford to pay a maid and invites Annie to stay the night at her house. Laura shows Annie a small space beside the kitchen, but Sarah complains she does not always want to live in the back. When Susie shows her dolls to Sarah and wants to give her a black one, Sarah refuses to take a black doll. The next morning, Annie starts taking care of the house and does the laundry and some groceries. Laura feels thankful to Annie for being considerate. Suddenly, Laura gets a call from the modeling agency. She requests Annie to stay and take care of her daughter Susie until Laura returns. Laura has been hired as a model for the flea powder advertisement, and she performs very well. She desperately tries to get her paycheck, but is informed that the paychecks are sent on Thursday. When she gets home, she is exhausted and feels glad that Annie has fed the children and taken care of the house in her absence. She informs Annie that the money from the modeling will be paid to her, but Annie suggests that they should keep it in their savings. In the next few days, Laura keeps looking for a decent acting opportunity, but gets exhausted after not getting any work. As the doorbell rings, the photographer from the beach, Steve, arrives there and hands over the pictures. They both discuss their dreams and aspirations, and Steve surprises Laura by asking her on a date, and she agrees. During their lunch date, Laura learns about an audition and leaves Steve without eating anything. When she reaches the casting office, it is crowded with people with appointments. So, Laura makes a plan, acts like an A-list celebrity recommended her, and meets the agent named Alan Loomis. However, he is a very clever man who sees through Laura's act and informs her that the auditions are closed because he wants to take her to a party. Alan tries to make advances at Laura, but she firmly refuses. When he tries to convince her to use her body to succeed in Hollywood, Laura feels humiliated and leaves. Meanwhile, at home, Steve helps Annie make envelopes for a living, while Annie informs Steve that she made a deal with the landlord about reducing their rent and getting a job while the kids are at school. Laura arrives there and bursts into tears while recollecting her horrible experience today. She gets so heartbroken that she wants to quit her acting dream, but Steve convinces her to follow her dreams. Later on, Laura checks up on Susie and finds a bandage on her wrist. Annie states that it was nothing but an experiment, as some kids at school passed the remarks that the blood of black people and white people was different. So Sarah wanted to compare her blood with Susie. Laura is sure that Annie will help Sarah understand her identity, but Annie feels like her daughter was born to be hurt. The next morning, Annie goes to deliver lunch to her daughter Sarah in her public school, but Sarah runs out of the classroom in anger, not accepting that she is the daughter of a black woman. Laura tries calming Sarah down by saying that they do not care about her mixed race or color and love her. The next day, she will take her to school herself, but Sarah refuses to return to that school. A few days pass, and around Christmas time, Steve picks Laura up to shop for Christmas presents for the children. He proposes to her for marriage and finally confesses his love, but suddenly, things take a turn when Laura receives a phone call from Mr. Loomis. He informs her that the famous award-winning playwright saw her advertisement and wants to cast her in his new play and will pay $250 a week. After hearing this exciting news, Laura gets ecstatic and informs Steve about it, but he strictly forbids her to meet Alan. Laura feels hurt about Steve's strict behavior and tells him that her acting career is more important to her than anything, and leaves. When Laura rehearses for her role at Christmas, Annie tells the children's story about Jesus. However, things take a turn when Sarah wants to know if Jesus is white or black, which makes her mother worried about the obsession of her daughter with her color. Finally, when Laura reaches her play rehearsals, David Edwards does not like her performance, stating that her actions are not funny. Laura informs him that these scenes are unnecessary for the play, and David is impressed with her confidence. He offers her another important role in the play and spends the rest of the day with her. Laura performs well in the play, and the audience chants her name, and everyone is impressed with her, despite her small role. David Edward holds a party for the success of his play and even shows Laura some news articles admiring her beauty and acting, stating that she is the new emerging star of Hollywood. When the party is over, David seduces Laura, and he informs her that he always falls in love with the leading ladies of his play, but Laura doesn't care and she wants to enjoy her success with him. They both become lovers, and David keeps casting Laura as his leading lady, and she becomes a hit in the next few years. Finally, Laura has become a successful star, but she feels tired and lonely. When David comes to pick her up for a meeting with the investors, she feels tired and wants to rest. She informs Annie that something is missing from her life after all these years of achieving her dream. Laura informs Annie that David wants to marry her, but she is not even in love with him and cannot decide. She thinks that David is good for her career, and if she settles down with him, she can finally spend some quality time with her daughter Susie, whom she hasn't seen in weeks. However, Annie reassures Laura that Susie understands her mother is working for her better future. Soon, Laura has enough money to buy a massive mansion full of luxuries. Annie tries to remind Laura that she should not waste money, but Laura wants to give her daughter the luxury of life that she didn't have. Annie also informs Laura that her daughter doesn't want to study in a very expensive school, but wants to spend more time with her mother, and Laura promises that she will do something about it. Suddenly, the doorbell rings, and David arrives there. He is annoyed at Laura that she didn't reply to his messages. Laura refuses to work in his next comedy, stating she is tired of doing the same work and wants to act in a serious play. Surprisingly, the audience appreciates the next play, and at the show's after-party, Steve arrives at Laura's residence and is surprised that Susie and Sarah are teenagers and have changed a lot over the years. Susie feels excited that maybe after the success of her mother's play, she will finally spend some quality time with her so that she can discuss some of her concerns. She wants to ask her mother about going to a party with the boys, and she also wants to know whether she should let a boy kiss her, but she cannot discuss this with her mother because Laura has no time. Laura invites Steve to join them at a picnic this coming Sunday with her whole family, and he agrees. On Sunday, Laura, Steve, Susie, and Annie go for a picnic while Sarah Jane pretends to be sick with flu and stays alone. When they leave, she gets ready to meet her secret boyfriend in the village. Meanwhile, Laura leaves Susie and Annie at the picnic table and walks with Steve. They both discuss their life throughout these years, and Steve informs Laura that he has finally gotten into a place he always wanted, but he's not happy with his life. He wants to retire soon and explore the world to discover what makes him happy. Suddenly, Laura blurts out that Steve should not forget about her, as she is a big part of his life. She gets shy after confessing her feelings, and they both kiss. On the contrary, Susie feels sad that her mother has left her alone again, so she confides in Annie. She asks her questions about the subjects she should take in college and whether she should kiss the boys. When they all get back, Laura asks Susie to check up on Sarah when she gets a call from her agent, who says that the famous Italian director wants to cast her in his new play. When Laura excitedly tells Steve about this news, he gets upset that, once again, Laura is abandoning him for selfish reasons. She tries to convince him to go to Italy with her, but he declines her offer and promises to meet her at Susie's graduation and leaves. As Sarah sneaks into her house secretly, she meets Susie and informs her about her boyfriend. Sarah gets extremely offended when Susie thinks her boyfriend must be black. Sarah elaborates that her boyfriend is white, and she has told him that he cannot come to her house as she has strict parents. The next day, Laura invites the Italian director and her agent to her home, and she requests Sarah to help her mother in the kitchen, but Sarah refuses as she has a date. When Laura thinks it is the chauffeur from next door, Sarah gets extremely offended that Laura thinks so low of her that she will date such low-ranking boys. Later, she goes in with a plate of food, mimicking a black person's accent, and embarrasses Laura in front of her guests. Laura confronts Sarah and says she and her mother are so anxious about her color, that's why she has to act like black people. Laura assures Sarah that they do not treat her differently because of her color, and all her family members love her. But Sarah isn't convinced. That night, Sarah goes out to meet her boyfriend Frankie, who behaves very rudely with her. He accuses her of lying and not telling him that she is the daughter of a black woman, so he starts beating her up and throws her on the road. Meanwhile, at home, Annie is excited that Laura is not going to Italy because she did not sign the deal, as the director wanted her in Rome for 1 week, and she does not want to miss her daughter's graduation. She looks at Annie and suspects that her health is deteriorating and wonders if she wants some money or any medical care. But Annie states that she is fine and has enough money to send her daughter to college and has savings for her funeral. Annie mentions that she has always wanted a grand and elegant funeral, and she has even written her demands on a piece of paper about all the friends she wants with her on that day. At Susie's graduation, she is very happy to be accompanied by her loved ones. Steve cannot believe that Laura is not in Italy. Suddenly, she gets an email stating that the Italian director still wants to work with her on her terms. Once again, Steve gets hurt that whenever he feels things are going okay between him and Laura, she leaves him for her career. Laura makes him promise that he will take care of her daughter when she's in Italy. In the next few days, Susie and Steve spend a lot of time together, horse riding, having dinner dates, and dancing, to the point that she develops a crush on him. One day, Susie asks Annie why she hasn't seen Sarah Jane in weeks, and Annie replies that she is working as a librarian in Manhattan, New York. Suddenly, she notices the address on the letter from her daughter, which is Harry's club. The first thing the next morning, Annie goes to Harry's club and watches her daughter dance, which makes her so ashamed. She barges in and informs the manager that she wants to meet her daughter Sarah, which makes her very angry that her mother told people about her black identity, so Sarah angrily leaves. She refuses to return home with her mother and asks her to go alone. When Laura finally comes back from Italy, Annie has become bedridden and extremely depressed. She informs Laura that Sarah has asked her to stop looking for her and to let her live her life. However, she still cares for Sarah and asks Steve to put a detective to find Sarah's location. Soon, he gives them Sarah's location, who is working as a dancer in Hollywood with a new name, Linda. Annie wants to meet her daughter for a final time, despite several warnings from Laura. She watches her daughter's performance with teary eyes, and later, Annie meets Sarah in her private room, telling her daughter she is there to say goodbye, and both mother and daughter get emotional and hug each other. When Sarah's friend arrives at her door, Annie simply informs her that she is Linda's caretaker and finally accepts her daughter's new identity. After returning home, Annie gets extremely sick, and Laura and Susie take care of her. One day, Susie informs Annie about her crush on Steve. On the same night, she watches her mother and Steve kissing from the window. Laura informs Susie that she and Steve will marry soon, and Laura will quit her acting career for good. When Annie informs Laura about her daughter's crush, she confronts Susie, who decides to leave New York and go to college in a faraway location. Soon, Annie dies, and Laura gives her a grand funeral as she wished. Suddenly, Sarah passes through the large crowd and throws herself into her mother's casket. She begs for her mother's forgiveness and cries out loud that she killed her mother. Laura takes Sarah in her limousine and watches the procession traveling through the city. A large African-American crowd watches the grand procession with teary eyes.